Okay, so thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me today. I am the communications officer from the People's Assembly. As you know, we are focusing on trying to connect people with their representatives and just broaden and enhance democratic features. And today recently, we've been specifically researching the basic income grant. We know that you are an advocate for the basic income grant based on opinion articles that you've written for the Daily Maverick and public statements that you've made. So if it's all right with you, I'll just jump right into my questions.
Oh, no problem.
Great. So, in one of your articles for the Daily Maverick, you said the simple fact is that our economy is unable to generate enough jobs to reduce and eliminate unemployment. Do you believe that South Africa has a problem with structural inequality and structural unemployment?
Yeah, I think that without a doubt, I believe that. And I mean, the evidence is there for all to see. I don't think that it's irrational to link this to our long history of structural inequality, and the structure of our labor market prior to 1994 certainly perpetuates the structural unemployment. The labor market, or those who are largely unemployed, mostly African, Black, to some degree colored South Africans, if we use old language, were excluded from the labor market, or were regarded as the kind of labor that would support manufacturing, mining, services, but in almost in a exploitative and low wage positions. And so as the economy has changed, the structure of our employment market pre-1994 for several decades, the failure to invest in education and training for a large portion, the majority of South Africans, perpetuates inequality and unemployment, and it is structural because it is based on the structure of our society that has dominated most of our lifetimes.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I think that does make sense. And obviously, we are still working with systems that were kind of founded during the apartheid government's reign. Uh, you also said that the basic income grant was a social, moral, and historical imperative that was crucial to the sustainability of South Africa's constitutional democracy. In what way does South Africa's history oblige us to offer a basic income grant?
Well, I think I partially sort of went there with the first question. Our society, our South Africa's history was a history of exclusion. And so one race group, the white South Africans, however white South Africans were classified through some fairly vulgar and obscene processes that determined who was white and who was not. And if you were not, as I said, you were largely excluded from South Africa's economy, received inferior services, were located in poorer locations, poorer as in less desirable in terms of access and mobility. Your education was a different kind of education. Access to higher education was also structured and limited. And so we have historically, we have created through this history the majority of South Africans who are excluded from our economy. You just have to look at the statistics. I mean, in management and in high-level management in the corporate sector is still predominantly white. The economy is still predominantly white-owned, and so those some and actively disempowering others and relegating those others to being sort of low-level support and labor in an economy that was geared to enrich some and enslave or disempower others. So I think that history, which prevails, the legacy of which prevails today, is exactly why I said that in the piece, that we have a historical obligation because what prevails today is a legacy of our history, and we have a legal obligation because our constitution certainly provides for social security, and those are inescapable.
Definitely. And even in the piece, you also mentioned that there were recommendations made by the Truth and Reconciliation Council that were never necessarily acted on. So there is definitely still incentive to try and create some resolutions for long-standing structural issues. Do you believe that our constitutional democracy is at risk if we do not expand social assistance?
I think so. I think in two respects. First of all, our constitutional democracy fails if it doesn't implement the Section 27 rights, which I regard as being the most basic human um, rights, and addressing the most basic human needs. So you can even go back to the old theory of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You cannot expect an adult South African to live with zero income. So you can't expect an adult to wake up every single day and have access to no income, no food, no water, which are the most basic human needs, certainly food and water, um, forever, in an economy that's not generating jobs to employ those people, even in entry level or skilled, or I mean unskilled or semi-skilled roles. So I think that we fail our constitution if we don't implement the Section 27 rights, which I regard as the starting point. That's where we should start, with in making sure that the Section 27 rights are implemented. So our constitution fails if it doesn't, if the state is not obliged and doesn't rise up to those Section 27 rights. And secondly, we saw how easy in July 2021 it was for nefarious purposes to encourage those who have nothing to participate in some fairly violent and disarming, in a way, looting and rioting in KwaZulu-Natal mostly, after the former President Zuma was incarcerated. So although there was some orchestration of those riots and some of the attacks on infrastructure and private property, the level to which those people who had nothing to lose were able to and ready to participate were, I think, warning signals to us that the large-scale unemployment and the large-scale access to zero income, which means you wake up with every day with nothing to eat and nothing to lose, is a threat to our democracy. And our constitutional democracy is under threat if we don't implement the Constitution.
Definitely. I think that the civil unrest has been a clear indication that people want more assistance from the state. People want to see, better policies being implemented in order to protect them from this really large problem we have of unemployment and poverty in South Africa. But you speak about accommodating and complying with the Section 27, but how is this in reality? How could social assistance be expanded, and what are members of parliament doing to push for something like the basic income grant? Because this has been a topic that has existed or been in conversation for quite a while, quite a few years, and we haven't seen much progress with its implementation.
So, I mean, obviously, the fact that we haven't seen much progress, despite it being investigated over and over and over again, probably almost for 2 decades that we ourselves, as the good party, are busy researching, because we think that the how part is the starting point, because it seems to be the sticking point. Instead of asking, can we afford a basic income grant, we should be asking, can we afford not to implement a basic income grant? And if you start, as I indicated earlier, with the premise that there's an obligation on the state and on society to make sure that every human being has their basic needs met, that means adequate food and adequate water at least, then that should be the priority in our budget and almost go in first. So, I mean, I think what we're busy researching is substitutions or reprioritization of the state's budget to accommodate an expanded social security network. And advocating for a social security network which will include a basic income guarantee or basic income grant does not mean that we give up on creating jobs. I mean, obviously, that would be the starting point, and that would be the first prize. But our economy is creating jobs, too few jobs and too slowly. And it's just common sense, I think, that we cannot expect adults to live with zero income forever. And some people will live without a job forever. So how do we expect them to live between the age of 18 and 60 when they qualify for a senior citizens or an old age pension?
Definitely. Yeah, this question of affordability has been raised time and again, where we question Parliament's or National Treasury's ability to actually make those funds available. But even if affordability was possible and we can make substitutions in the budget, a lot of people are concerned that in light of state capture and public funds being misused, how will Parliament actually ensure that the state funds for social spending are not mismanaged and that the beneficiaries do receive the grants as they are supposed to?
Look, I mean, state capture, corruption should not be the deciding factor on whether we need to implement a social security system. Because, I mean, we don't raise those questions when we say, let's allocate funding for road infrastructure. We don't say, let's not allocate any funding for road infrastructure because people may steal the money, because then we may as well do nothing, include not having a parliament, because corruption and the capture of state entities and the abuse of public funds permeates throughout all aspects of government services and society. So that cannot be the reason for not implementing it. I mean, obviously, there's an obligation on the state to first of all fund it and then make sure that it is distributed to those who qualify. And if we can go as far as universal basic income, then everybody qualifies and you repay those of us who don't deserve it or need it, repay it back in our taxes. So whatever system is implemented must be as secure as possible. But I would never allow, I mean, I think it's a false debate to say, well, we can't do it because the money will be stolen, because then we can't do anything in South Africa because almost everything is at risk for corruption and capture.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely a fair argument to make. And you mentioned that one of the possibilities for funding is to actually start increasing taxes for the highest earners in South Africa. Do you think that is more feasible than perhaps just making room in the existing budget?
I mean, this is the research that we're doing now. And, I think we came to the point where we have championed the idea based in constitutional terms and based just in common sense terms for quite some time. And we needed now to get to the how part. So we are doing the research right now on whether substitutions in the budget can help fund a broader state security or social security net. And whether that is possible without raising taxes or imposing a wealth tax, for example, is something that our research must still assist us in coming to terms with. So it may be a combination of both, that that we make substitutions and we make hard choices in our budgeting process so that we don't leave millions of South Africans without any access to resources to buy basic need to meet basic needs. Maybe we need to combine substitutions with a wealth tax, or look at our taxation system as part of the overall solution. So we're in that process, and I can't give you a definite answer yet because that research is still happening. But it may be that the substitutions is sufficient. It may mean making some hard choices in our budget and also some hard choices in our taxation system. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commission proposed a wealth tax, and it's unfortunate that that wasn't properly investigated or considered at the time, because that was probably the time when South Africans would have been most open to it. As we emerged from apartheid into our democracy, as we went through that very painful Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all those hearings, I think there would have been a lot of goodwill that we could have taken advantage of, for want of a better word, in implementing some sort of wealth tax for reparations. And as the decades have gone on, so that goodwill has probably dissipated a little.
Yes. And I just want to clarify, when you say that we are researching, are you referring to a specific portfolio committee, or is it you as an advocate of BIG and other specific members of parliament? It would be useful to know that, so that citizens and civilians who are also interested in supporting the movement are able to keep track of these sorts of debates and discussions and maybe contribute to them where necessary.
So, I mean, when I say we, it's we as in the good party, me and as a member of parliament. Outside of any parliamentary process, we are commissioning independent research into affordability and how we can afford this, with a starting point investigating whether substitutions or budgeting choices will allow us to accommodate a basic income, at least at the food poverty level. So that's our research, and then once we have completed it, it will help us to develop our strategy as to how we continue to champion this, whether it's through private members' bills, through trying to drive policy in Parliament, engaging with other organizations who champion this. So the starting point for us is to try and understand the affordability and how this can be achieved. And that research is what we're doing as a party, and I'm busy doing as a member of parliament.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And if a member of the public wanted to help efficiently lobby within Parliament or for Parliament to pursue a basic income grant, are there any recommendations you could make, or any suggestions you could make to those civilians who'd like to help and like to support the movement?
Well, I think that, I mean, certainly there's the petitions process, which is open to any member of the public or any organization to petition Parliament, basically, and then it gets referred to the appropriate portfolio committee for consideration. So that's one avenue. But I mean, what I'm hoping that we'll be able to do is to put a proposal forward that demonstrates the affordability, that counteracts what seems to have been a growing movement of organizations seeking to discredit the affordability of a basic income grant or guarantee. We've noticed in the last couple of weeks a number of organizations have published pieces. Some of those pieces have, I think, quite absurdly suggested that implementing a basic income grant will lead to large-scale emigration out of the country. So there's been some highly reactionary pieces that have been published recently, which seek to undermine any argument in favor of a basic income guarantee or a basic income grant. And so we are seeking to balance that argument. And once we've got that research, we will share it with South Africa. We will write pieces. We may draft a private members bill. So our next step, certainly as the Good Party, will be based on this research. In the meantime, those people who are interested in this should use the petitions process and participate in the public debate around this.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. That's really helpful. And I think, yeah, as you say, the petitions process is very useful, but there aren't enough people who know that it is a possibility and that they can influence that sort of research and policy investigation. Um, there are some people who have also suggested that a universal basic income grant might also be useful. And of course, that means offering social assistance to everybody, not necessarily just the unemployed. When you consider the differences between the basic income grant and the universal basic income grant, which option do you think is more necessary in our current political, social, and economic climate? And which one do you think is more feasible?
Well, I think that, and this is without the research having been concluded, the kind of targeted basic income guarantee, which I prefer a basic income guarantee to a grant, because it sounds like when we use the word grant that it's a gift and that it's not a right, and I regard it as a right. So I think that the basic income guarantee sort of targeted to those who are unemployed and have no other source of income is probably more affordable in some respects. And it's really hard to articulate this, but maybe the universal basic income would say everybody in South Africa gets 645 or 647 Rand per month, which is, I think, the food poverty line, if they follow our argument, which is at least that the basic income must meet the food poverty line. Everybody gets that regardless of your, and then you repay it back to the state in the form of income tax because you don't actually need it when you do your taxes. For those of us who don't need it, and the benefits of that system is that it is less administratively burdensome, probably less open to corruption and capture, as if we refer back to what the questions you asked earlier, because it just gets paid to everybody. And you don't have to have there's no means test, so there's no question of fraudulent applications. And it's less costly to administer, which is what some researchers found, that it is ultimately less expensive because although the cash outlay upfront is quite a burden, it's recovered in the tax system, and it's less administratively burdensome to manage and therefore less costly to manage. So whether that's preferable or not is almost like a cash flow question. Can South Africa afford to outlay that cash to every adult South African and then recover it from those who don't need it through the tax system? Is something that I'm not sure I don't know the answer to that. So if I had to choose, I would choose targeting the basic income guarantee to those who have no other source of income, because I think our fiscus would more easily be able to handle that in the beginning years, because to find the cash for the large scale payouts that would be required before we recover any of that at the end of the tax year is probably going to be too difficult. I'm not sure if I answered it clearly enough, but if I didn't, I'm happy to clarify.
No, I think that does definitely make sense. I mean, it would maybe be easier to push for Treasury to just start with unemployed persons, because it's not as much of an upfront payment. But of course, we understand what you say, in that the universal basic income grant is less administratively challenging because it's simply a payout to everyone. And that actually is an area of research that we've been working on currently, is sort of the differences between BIG and UBIG. Um, but yeah, I think that does make sense. And actually, those are all of the questions I have specifically on BIG today. Are there any further comments that you'd like to make, or any other message that you'd like to finish off with in this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's really important, I've just said it, but I think I'd like to say it again so that it's absolutely clear that we live in our country governed by this constitution, which has Section 27 rights. And when we talk about expanding social security for those who, so that nobody is left behind, for me, we must be clear that this is a right and it's not a gift. And for as long as we don't implement a basic income system that leaves no adult South African without any form of income and thus unable to meet their basic needs, we're not living up to the Constitution at all. In fact, I think that we are probably in breach of the Constitution. So although the state, I mean, that section allows the state to progressively achieve those rights, I think almost 30 years into our democracy, we should have seen more progress towards achieving those rights. So for me, it's important that we disavow this idea that it's a handout, that it creates a dependency, and that there's a binary choice between basic income and job creation. Obviously, we would all like to live in a country where there's 100% employment with nobody who's looking for a job unemployed. But that's not the reality in South Africa, and it's not going to be for a long, long time. And so we cannot expect young adults or adult South Africans who are unemployed to wake up every single day with not knowing where the next meal is going to come from, if they're going to have a meal, and without any income. So that, for me, it's very important for us to disavow this notion that it's a gift and that people are not entitled to it, because people are entitled to it in terms of the Constitution. So I think it's really important that we make that point. And also the point that, given that it's now almost 30 years into democracy, we've had enough time to progressively work towards expanding social security so that people are not left behind. Then I want to make a final point, and that is, if we go back to the President's State of the Nation address, he actually almost made the argument for us when he spoke about the implementation of the social relief of distress grant, which is 350 Rand per month, that was implemented in response to the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. When he, spoke about, he cited an anecdote of a man in Soweto who used the 350 Rand per month grant to create an ice cream business. And that coincides with a lot of the research that actually these small cash transfers to impoverished communities do actually stimulate economic growth and economic development, because very often those small cash transfers are transferred into become an access or form of access to finance in order to finance small businesses, and ultimately in some test areas in other parts of the world have led to increased employment.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for bringing it up. I think it's definitely worth discussing, as you say, this belief that there is a binary, and that we have to sort of pick either growing the labor market and focusing on job creation, or that we need to expand social assistance. I think that in some arguments that social assistance definitely does help with job creation and economic growth. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we really look forward to sharing this conversation and contributing to more robust discussions about the feasibility of this basic income grant. So, yeah, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, and I'll stop recording there.
Cool. Thanks so much.